Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Politillo.
And Katie Godden from The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. On our last episode, we launched a podcast that was made completely from AI. James is the one behind this. So James, can you explain a little bit more about what you did and how you did it?
Yeah, so the whole challenge was we wanted to focus on how you can experiment with new learning tools or new ways of creating content or any of the tasks we have to do in learning. So the challenge was to take a podcast episode and see how quickly we could produce something using tools out there that didn't cost a lot of money or were virtually free. So what I did was to think about the premise of what the podcast episode would be. So we were creating a podcast completely driven by AI. Obviously, as the human, I had to direct those AIs to do it. So I started by thinking about what I wanted to do, and I started in ChatGPT and put in a search of saying which are the best tools to use for using and putting together a podcast episode. So that threw me out some. I had a quick look at each of them and decided to go with a tool called 11 Labs. Then I went back into ChatGPT and I created a prompt to ask it to create a script for our podcast. Now I gave it some information to help. So I gave it some recordings of our podcast episodes, some transcriptions of recordings we've done before to give it context. And that was to make it sound like us. And I said the podcast episode was around the ethic or how you put together an AI-driven podcast episode, told it a little bit about us. So again, not a massive prompt, but some context. That then produced a script, took that script, put it back into 11 Labs. And the other thing I had to do was then clone our voices. So I took an old recording from our podcast and took about 30 seconds of each of our voices and put that into 11 Labs and created 2 cloned voices. And then from there, I was able to align those cloned voices to the relevant sections of the script. So it already told me this should be me and this should be Katie. So put that in, hit generate, and then went through the normal process of uploading it to our podcast. And I slightly changed the cover for our thumbnail for the podcast, and rather than it just be me or you but just indicate it was AI, I just generated some avatars of you and me to replace our normal pictures that sit on the podcast thumbnail. And that was it, and it took 30-ish minutes to do that from beginning to end.
That's crazy. And like when I first listened to it, it was quite scary. Given I understood how many recordings you fed into the AI tool, which wasn't very many, it was crazy to listen to an AI tool that sounded sort of like me and like you as well. And it kind of picked up on the nuances and how we speak. And yeah, I thought that it was just weird listening to it.
And it's interesting breaking it down because I can analyze each of the things it did well and each of the things it maybe could have done better. And some of that was the time, the training, the effort. And it makes me think again that using these tools is just like managing or working with a team. So you get to understand what that team can do well or what your team member can do well. In the same way, you come out of this saying, this is what AI does well. This is maybe where it needs a bit more support, needs a bit more effort. So breaking it down, giving it context, the script was actually pretty good. And what I liked about the script is it picked up the nuance of how we both talk. So the script itself had different pacing or word usage for me and you, which was interesting. And it also picked up who led, because I generally lead on podcasts. So it picked up almost the balance of how we talk, the way we'd put things across. So I think that it did really well from conceptualizing it. And the latest version of ChatGPT did this better than previous versions. So it was able to actually take a recording and a transcript and understand those. And I think that improved the quality of that output. So that's something that's got better over a period of time. Definitely. Then going across to 11 Labs, and again, a different but interesting view on this. So 11 Labs allows you to clone voices, but it does have some guardrails round, and I deliberately didn't take the time to train the voices as well as I could have done, because I was doing a quick, cheap version of this to show the capabilities. However, if I had wanted to take the time and rather than just feed it 30-second recordings, and those 30-second recordings had no guardrails around them, so I wouldn't expect them to be high quality. I wouldn't expect them to sound like humans, otherwise I could just take anyone's voice and start cloning it. For me to clone a voice and make it higher quality, I've got to take a longer recording of that. It's got to be a clean recording, so not recording a conversation, but a sustained period of speech. You can upload several of those versions of things, and therefore it will understand the speak, but then you have to validate that by doing a live recording of your own voice. So there's some guardrails to mean that, Katie, you weren't in the same location as me yesterday. I couldn't just rip off an old podcast, put that up, do a highly trained version. You go off on holiday for a couple of weeks and I've, produced a whole load of podcasts for you advocating something you don't think. I couldn't do that. There are some guardrails in place to stop that from happening. But again, that experimentation and understanding and just trying the tools out, because lots of people will stop just from the fear of not doing it, or that's not ethical. So testing out, you start to understand what's there and what's not there, and where there are risks and where they're not.
Yeah, I think, like I said, that was the scary bit to me, because it did sound really similar, or initially it sounded really similar to both of us. And I think, like you said, it picked up the way that we speak, etc. So, yeah, when you said actually to be able to expand and make this better, you do need your kind of authorization to be able to do that. It was quite a relief, because it is quite worrying to go, what could you attach a voice to? Especially sort of like famous people, I guess, as well. If you've got someone famous advocating your brand and they haven't, or whatever people might use it in. But I think it's just amazing what it did, especially like you said, given time constraints, money, etc. We were able to create a podcast in sort of less than an hour and have an episode and publish that. So, but still control the narrative as well. So as much as like you and I weren't there, we weren't actually speaking to each other, we're still able to ensure the narrative is correct. But it just saves them the time of that recording piece. And I think, my brain goes to go, what else could this do? And I think there's so much, it's such a powerful tool.
I think they are massively powerful tools, and it's about thinking about their utilization. We can worry about the fact, well, if that product didn't have guardrails around it, yes, maybe I could have taken the time to clone a famous person, clone you, clone someone else, and get them to say, even stuff they agree with. That permission is really important to use our image or use our voice or use anything about us. And we were it's very deliberate when I prompted the podcast to make it clear right from the beginning that this wasn't us, because I didn't want to deceive anyone that this was us. That wasn't the intention. It was to showcase what we could do. And I think it's important that we use AI as an aid and support tool as part of our armory, but we're clear when we're using it. We shouldn't be trying to pass it off as something else. It's almost this shame, or it's a dirty secret that I'm using it to aid my work. Well, no, it isn't. I did this in a way that's going to help. So I'm doing an explainer video. I might not want to have to sit there and do the explainer video. I might trip over my own words, but I've got the script there. I've got my voice. It's personalized. It's coming from me. There's no real, if that's part of what I'm putting across, that can help me to do that in a structured, clear, articulate way. If I take that extra time to train the voice, because like you, I initially listened to it and there's two things going on in my head. There's that bit really doesn't sound human or like me, because at times it didn't, and then there's bits I'm like, that sounds exactly like me, that's a bit freaky. So yeah. There's like waves going through there. But if you take the time to really train them, and more time in the edit than I did, you can make it sound seamless. So you can use it for good. You can use it as part of your toolkit. It might take a little bit more time of setup, a little bit more time in edit, but it certainly could reduce time overall. And even the digesting and putting through the script of understanding our conversation style and understand the way that our podcasts are structured. I thought that from ChatGPT doing that was really interesting as well.
Yeah, and I think the use of AI is like we've spoken about this quite a lot on lots of different podcasts, and I think it's becoming like so obvious in people's work. The more people that you work with in different formats, whether it's kind of summarizing or creating itineraries or, simplifying the way that we're speaking, whatever it might be, people are using it. But I think it's that transparency piece which is quite important as well. So, like you said, we were quite upfront that actually you'd created this in AI and it wasn't us, and you used avatars to ensure that. But I think, like I said previously, if you're using it, but the words are coming from you, and like you said, it just becomes a bit easier to record, to, edit down, to sound more succinct, whatever that might be. I think it's not a bad way of doing it. I don't see what's wrong with doing it like that, because you've trained something to sound like you to ultimately save you time in the future. And this is what I think we should be using it for. And I think, the examples that I just gave you in regards to AI about summarizing, creating itineraries, all of those things, that's fine as well. But we need to be transparent when we're using it. So, I think people aren't then worried about not matching up to certain standards as well, or putting in tons of work when actually someone's taken seconds to do something because ChatGPT has done it. I think there's lots of elements as to why you should be transparent to things. But yeah, I think it's just awesome.
And I think it's interesting to think about where you use it and not. And I've had a few things pop into my head recently because I use AI for certain tasks. Do that. Here's a prompt. Here's something I want to do. Transcribe a meeting and pull out the relevant points. I still take notes because I don't trust it or miss nuance. It won't understand what I understand is important. So I'm still doing that, but it just gives me a starter for 10. I might go through and add in my own points, rejig it, but it speeds up some of those processes, and it will pick up stuff I haven't picked up in my notes as well, so it can make it more rounded. So I think it's part of what you do. But I was also thinking about where reliance on tech makes us worse at stuff. And one thing I've really noticed is my typing has got worse. And that's nothing to do with AI. That's to do with things like Word automatically correcting your typing as you go and all of those support tools. So therefore, providing I remotely hit the keyboard in the right order, things will look okay. But in versions of Teams where it doesn't correct it, most of my messages read like gibberish. So because I've got sort of lazy through the use of text, so that skill of typing accurately has become less relevant to me. So therefore my skill has deteriorated slightly. And I was thinking about the same with when you're using AI. So there was a piece of work I did yesterday, which was planning an onboarding and induction to a system from beginning to end. I don't go near AI. And I deliberately didn't go near AI because that is my own experience, my nuance, my understanding of the client, my understanding of the type of organization, the speed of things that are needed. And this comes back to the same thing that I've always thought around what we do that's different to other people, but deep expertise. So lots of people I've met in my career come along with here's what I've done before, here's let me copy and paste it. And that's almost like some of that lazy AI approach to stuff of not thinking about the nuance, not really understanding what you're doing. And that bit of work I was doing around the onboarding yesterday was into that deep expertise stuff I'd say that we bring, because it was doing a load of stuff that can't really be codified, that wouldn't, if I'd put that same information or a prompt in, a general prompt. And I know what, I've done induction prompts into ChatGPT. I know even if I put all of the nuance, it wouldn't pull out what I wanted to. And I didn't want to be editing a version of something else. I wanted to start and do it in the way I wanted. So I think being aware of yourself is really I've thought about that a lot in the last few weeks, and I wouldn't want to just outsource the podcast to let's train the voices and let's not do it, because I enjoy the quality of the conversations. I enjoy the thought process bouncing off you, bouncing off our guests. That creates more creativity than you would by just outsourcing it to AI. But you could, and we know there are lots of podcasts out there that are literally that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong if they're done in the right way, but I think it doesn't replace everything.
No, and also it doesn't replace your thoughts, because AI could then prompt a different thought process. It could prompt a different conversation topic. You could go down paths using AI that you perhaps would never have thought about normally.
Mhm.
And that's not fair, because I think if you're going to do something creative like creating a podcast, it needs to come from you. I think when you're there controlling the narrative, it's fine, but you have to have that initial prompt to build that out. I think doing all of the podcasts via AI defeats the whole point of having them a little bit, because anyone could go in and go, look, give me an idea for a learning podcast and we want to talk about this subject, and it could pull two voices out. It doesn't have to be you or I. And so I just don't see the point of then doing stuff. But this is where I've got to as well before with AI and the thought of it and how far you could go with it. Do things become just redundant because what is the point to things then if we know that we can get it? And will be people become lazier and lazier in the way that they approach things? And like you said, we're quite good at troubleshooting and solving issues and thinking outside the box and finding workarounds when people can't find workarounds, and all of those good things. um Chat GPT or AI can't necessarily do that in the same way. They'll come up with other ways of doing it, but will everyone just rely on AI tools and then lose the ability to be able to do that? And I know we've had that conversation in the past. But equally, just with other bits, will people become less creative? And I think we've had this conversation as well, and I've had it with friends recently of art and music, and do they become redundant because we've got a tool that enables us to be able to create a piece of art, or that we can create music using the thousands and millions of bits of music that are out there already, and something that can aggregate those all together and then pull something out. you know does do people then become redundant in roles? But then does that make us less creative, and what are we then as humans?
Absolutely, and I think there's almost a passion piece in there as well, a little bit. So there might be tasks that you don't bring a lot of expertise or passion for, and maybe AI can help with those things. But the bits where you add more passion or your expertise, I, as you know, the illustration you said around just getting AI to do the podcast, we could completely outsource it and just say, right, we want to produce, we're on, this is episode 128, but we want to produce 100 episodes of a learning podcast aimed at this audience. Please suggest topics, suggest some host personas, create voices for us. The episode should be X long, etc. And go. We could do
Yeah.
that, and that would be a way of doing it. It's not a way I'd advocate or want to do it that would bring the difference and nuance and creativity, I don't think. But you could run that as almost an A/B test. But I wouldn't want to do that. I think more importantly, what I want people to take away from this episode and the last episode is go and listen to them both. We put some stuff out there, a bit tongue in cheek of, which do you prefer, AI us or real us? But, there is a genuine conversation with that. There's research in the past shown that, some people actually prefer speaking to a bot than a human in certain instances. But it's more about the embracing AI, but knowing where the limits are and the guardrails, and getting out there and thinking about what you could do, testing, iterating, building that into your way of working, into your team's way of working. And I'd really like to see more experimentation out there and more active sharing of that experimentation, and not stuff that's polished and slick, but I've tried this out, it didn't quite work, I'm doing this, I'm putting it aside because I don't think it's quite there yet, but just sharing that and having more of an open space, because learning is an iterative process. You learn by testing the tools. We should be advocating and leading that within everything we do.
Yeah, completely agree. And like you said, it'd be interesting to find people's opinions, whether they preferred AI us or real us. So let us know and comment and share your ideas and thoughts. And like you said, where people have used AI before and what they've learned, and how they've done things differently and where maybe it's not worked so well.
Absolutely. And if anyone wants to come and share their experiments, or even if you don't want to share your own, but you think there's stuff that you'd like us to test out or look into, then please let us know as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.